Hi, I'm Howard County Councilmember Christiana Rigby. You're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, the official podcast of the Maryland Association of Counties.
Welcome to the briefing room here on the Conduit Street Podcast. I'm Don Butchko, and joining me in the co-host spot today is Terry Hickey, Director of Baltimore County's Department of Housing and Community Development. Terry, how you feeling today?
Feeling good, man. You know, I can always sit and talk about housing. So thanks for inviting a local government housing guy to do this podcast. Really, it's going to be great.
Oh, this is going to be a really good episode. So if you're just tuning in, this is episode 2 of our conversation on housing finance. If you haven't listened to episode 1, go back and check it out. A lot of the concepts and terms that we're going to be using today, we kind of go through the basics in that first episode. So go back and get your foundation. We are going to be digging really deep into money and specifically the nature and cost of private funding, which really forms the basis of the capital stack. Housing projects largely rise and fall based on the cost of money and the size of any remaining funding gaps. We're going to explore interest rates. We're going to talk about borrowing costs, inflation, trade policy, tariffs, national economic conditions. We really have a fun-filled, packed episode.
This is a really great topic, Tom, to break down. And anybody that's responsible for doing housing deals or is just really curious about how these things happen, it's something they're going to want to listen to. Private capital has been, but it's beginning to play a really oversized role in affordable housing deals, particularly as public investment becomes more volatile, leading to gaps and limited opportunities. And we're starting to see a lot of market rate developers and investors searching for ways to address the affordability challenge and even open up new markets. So this is really timely. Can't wait to get into it.
Terry, we have a pretty awesome guest right now for this particular episode. We have Brian McLaughlin, and I'm just going to read a little bit from his resume because we have the guy. So Brian is the founder and managing partner for PlanetWorks. He's a member of the board of directors for the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, as well as a member of the board for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, as well as a ton of other housing entities that have to do with housing and finance. Brian, welcome to the briefing room.
Hey, Dom and Terry, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Before we dig in, anytime we have someone really interesting, I love to kind of touch on, their background and how they got to where they are. So, Brian, we just kind of read a laundry list of organizations that you're affiliated with. But for our listeners, we have a lot of state and local policymakers who may not have heard of you. Talk about kind of your background, who you are, where you sit in the housing finance universe.
No, thanks. I appreciate it. And look, I think you're right. I mean, I appreciate also words like awesome and me in the same sentence. I don't get that very often. And maybe by the end of this, your listeners may divorce those two words as well in the same sentence. But I, for better or for worse, have logged nearly 30 years of my life in this industry and in this topic, and feel like it's really smart of you all to try to put a spotlight on it, because at the end of the day, this is what drives the physical landscape we ride around and see every day. If it's not for finance, the street you drive along wouldn't look the same way. At some level, everything you're looking at had a dollar sign behind it, and someone who was paid to put it there, and someone who was paid to come up with a concept. And so we, for better or for worse, we live in a derivative world where financing is the starting place. And so in housing, I got started myself in the late 90s with my first project. I'd done my planning degree in grad school and had landed in a small town in Pennsylvania and ran a small nonprofit, community-based, walk to work, lived in the neighborhood we served, lived in low-income housing, and got a bunch of housing and a hospital and some other things built in a short amount of time. And if I fast forward 30 years, I've had the honor of sitting at the kind of in the executive office at Fannie Mae, where I directed the executive office and really looked at a master system of how an organization like that put capital into 1 in 4 houses in the country. Lovely state of Maryland. I was assistant secretary for the Department of Housing, so really number 2 or 3 person in the group looking at how we're shaping the landscape for financing in communities. I've run the fifth largest nonprofit serving the affordable housing industry as CEO for 4 years. Again, trying to transform from a nonprofit's perspective how we channel thought, resources, and capital into changing communities and changing lives. And then, a lot of stops in between, including several private equity firms, including 3-4 year run where I would fly to China, come back and help to channel foreign direct investment into projects in the U.S. And, over 2 years, brought over $80 million cash to really seed some really smart projects in the Maryland community. So it's been a nice run. And currently in my role, I'm sitting at the top of an organization that really, again, thinks a lot about how to transform industries through smart management and smart capital. And so we really have leaned in the manufacturing space. Our ultimate target is manufactured housing, but currently we're a major producer of defense parts. So we have lots of contracts producing defense items that I won't unpack. We own an aerospace company and produce a lot for Bombardier and Boeing, primarily internal components that go into the interior cabins of planes and then some external parts. And then we also have in St. Louis a radiant heat manufacturing company that produces a really smart low voltage radiant heat film. And so we're really preparing ourselves to take on what we think is the next frontier in this field, which is how to rethink modular housing in a way that scales and works.
That's very cool. I mean, you sound like a Renaissance man. 1 minute we're over here doing housing finance. I love how you just kind of casually dropped in. I was assistant secretary at DHCD, also a leader of the fifth biggest nonprofit. I have a question, though. How did you get to the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond? How does one become a member of the board there?
Well, I applaud Richmond Fed Tom Barkin. He's really someone who thinks every day about how does the Fed do its job by talking and understanding the folks who make up our district. And so Tom really has a mission of getting out and talking and meeting and talking and listening, and uses that to help shape his views about what's happening macroeconomically and microeconomically, and what that means for interest rates. So Tom was on a mission to find more folks that could be part of his local boards. And through one way or another, we were briefing the feds on some affordable housing questions at one point. And I think he liked the fact that I do have a master's in economics. I can talk Pareto efficiency and equilibrium a little bit. And so I got a wonderful invitation to be considered for a branch board role for the Baltimore branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond.
Before we move on to really the meat of the policy, do you have any kind of high-level thoughts about the role of private capital and subsidized housing?
Look, high level, and I think you're right. Let's just unpack it. But high level, it is the driver. It's the difference maker. And I think the easiest way to think about it is, capital is always on a mission. And that's really the question here is, which mission is my capital on, and which capital do I need to achieve my own end result? So it's like getting in your car in the summer and going on a trip. Capital is asking the question, where do I want to go and how do I want to get there? A lot of capital wants to take a few extra risks and get there a little faster with a little higher reward. Some capital likes to play it safe, doesn't make that left turn at the light until the light's yellow, and, doesn't dodge its way in front of an oncoming car. It's a lot more conservative, but because it's more conservative, it doesn't expect as much reward. So capital is just a question of what risks do we want to take over what timeline, and with what rewards do we want to get for that?
So I'm going to jump in with some questions here, Dom. I think let's get in and break it down. Brian, at the local level, if you're somebody, like us in Baltimore County that's trying to put deals together, if you are somebody that follows local affordable housing production, I think traditionally the capital stack, the list of capital that's coming into a deal sort of was already there. And folks come to the county and ask, we need additional funds and support to do this. So I think it's even a little bit of a mystery at the local level, what goes into the making of that group of federal that we call the capital stack. But these days I'm seeing more and more locals have to go upstream and start to talk to investors earlier and get more creative. And so it's something we're learning as we go. So I really want to break this down into the component parts so people get a sense. And let's start with something super basic like interest rates, right? It's something we hear about in the news every day. We think about when we look at our own accounts, but we may not think of the impact between interest rates and local housing deals, right? So talk a little bit Why are they so important in housing finance, and what impact are those interest rates having at present?
Look, real estate is one of these industries that you're going to hear people talk about as a levered industry. All that means is no one or people very rarely take on a real estate project with all cash. There's usually debt. So it's levered. It's got debt. And in industries that are highly levered, they are the most sensitive to interest rate movement. So slight movements make a project that suddenly worked not work. I mean, literally on a traditional 50 to 80 unit apartment building, 0.25%, 25 basis point movement up in interest rate can make that project suddenly in the hole by $500,000. It literally is that simple. And so it's highly sensitive to interest rates. And folks try to plan. No one planned for what happened over the last few years with the rapid growth of several hundred basis points, several percents higher than we are now. You try to make room for 0.5% change, maybe 0.75%. So it's exactly what you're saying, Terry, which is that we're as much as we want to be smart and design well and pick out countertops and flooring types in the most efficient way, that one of the biggest drivers, no matter how bright you think you are, is going to be what's just happened to interest rates around you.
Can I ask you real quick, because one of the things I don't think is well understood, when a development group comes to a local government and wants to pitch a deal and they're putting their financing in place and they're putting together what we call their pro forma, their 202, what their numbers look like, how volatile have you seen interest rates playing a role? What I mean by that is they're factoring in one interest rate. Things get bogged down at the local level for any variety of political, zoning, land use reasons. What can happen to that interest rate along the way, and how can that dramatically change a deal?
So, Terry, think about it this way. If someone were taking on a project, and boy, I can't, one of the things that shocks everybody is how much it costs to build a unit these days. And, $500,000 a unit is not a crazy number anymore, believe it or not. An apartment unit, traditional apartment unit. If you can get down to the low 400s, you're really doing great. If you're out in suburban land where the cost of land might be lower than in more urban environments or built environments, maybe you can get closer to 400,000. But I'm working on projects in Washington, D.C. now at 635,000 a unit. I'm talking for a 300 unit building. I've got a project that just wrapped up in Gaithersburg, 550 a unit. So that gives you a realm of how much money we're talking about. So in a world where you just had $10 million of debt, which isn't a lot of debt, now, if you think about how much money it would cost you to do at, $500,000 a unit, say a 75 unit building, I mean, we're talking about $37 million. Traditionally, people would borrow more than 2/3 of that. Maybe they're getting up to 70% of that. So you might have bank debt somewhere, in the vicinity of 25 million. But let's just keep it simple. $10 million of debt gets financed. If you're talking about a 5% interest rate, that's going to cost you around $650,000 a year on a traditional 30-year amortization schedule. If that interest rate went up 1% to 6%, then that same project, nothing else changed about the project. Suddenly, our annual debt service is closer to $720,000. So you end up with this, $70,000 to $75,000 increase per year for 30 years because of a change in interest rate policy on a project that only had $10 million in debt. Here's where it really matters to people, and I think this is the way to think about it. Okay, so maybe you can figure out a way to make up $70,000 more per year with nothing else about the project that's changed. Suddenly your rents didn't just go up because interest rates went. Suddenly your insurance costs didn't go down. Everything's the same, but you got to find that money. The real issue is the value of your project just dropped because the amount of money you have left at the end of the year is 70,000 less. And that's how a bank and everybody else thinks about the value of anything is after you pay all your expenses, what do you have left? What you have left is what somebody's going to get if they buy your project. So the value of whatever you do really is whatever you have left. Well, if whatever you had left just went down by $70,000, the way something called capitalization rates work, that means your property is worth less than more than $1 million less than it was before. So again, you can say, oh, guys, suck it up. $70,000 ain't a big deal. You'll figure out how to make it up. Well, yes, but if I want to ever get out of this project, or if I want a bank to know that they can get out of this project if I mess up, they're valuing my project. And the thing that just happened with that 1% interest rate is the value that they're putting on my property just went down over $1 million. And that's the bigger issue. So now that the value went down $1 million, the bank's saying, I can't lend you as much. So now the problem is I got to go raise that gap that just came about. That's the vicious cycle here, is now that new thing that just ate up some of the leftover money that was going to be there for a rainy day fund or to make some other guy feel comfortable if he buys it because he's got that extra 70 per year each year. That's gone. I can't get as much money to build it. Now I got to go raise it. And it just keeps going down every time we end up in this interest rate increase cycle. So that's a simple way of understanding it. And that, again, was just for $10 million with 1%. I'm talking about projects that are financing $30 and $40 million where the interest rate shock has been more like 3.5%. Okay, so now you understand why so little is happening and changing in affordable housing on the streets that we drive by.
So I want to put kind of a bow on that because I think that was, Terry, I think that was a really interesting question. And Brian, I think that answer kind of spells out something that we're hearing a lot from Annapolis, the fact that we need to move faster. If we can't get a permit approved fast enough, if we can't get that project moving and all of a sudden the fundamentals of the project don't change, but because of the way we finance them, the interest rate changes, all of a sudden that's the difference between investment coming to your community, investment coming to Maryland, or investment going to another state, Virginia, North Carolina, et cetera. I think that point is really important. As we as local governments, when we're thinking about this, it's really important. Speed is a big part here. Terry, it looks like you want to jump in on that.
No, that's it. And it's one of the things that we, usually the housing entity that's working with the developer doesn't control the permitting process and others. And so I think you're right. Putting a fine point on this is speed matters, but speed coupled with rules of engagement that don't change, which Brian said, vicious cycle goes all the way back. So great point, Brian. Great answer. Not a great outlook, a great answer. And thanks for helping us understand that part of this.
So one thing while we're on the subject of interest rates that I want to touch upon, tools for local governments, one phrase that I've heard thrown around, and I just don't know a lot about it. I hear folks talking about buying down the rate, that you can buy down the interest rate, and that counties have done this. Brian, can you kind of explain what that means, how that process works, and if a jurisdiction is interested, how they might go about doing that?
Well, that gets a little funky when you're talking about large commercial financing. I mean, I think a lot of folks who've bought a home or refinanced a home had this question, hey, you can get a lower rate by basically paying points, right? You put some more money on the table up front. The bank looks at that as a recovery of its money it's putting out, and it does a little calculation and says, well, if you pay this amount up front, it'll bring the overall cost of your financing down by this amount. So you get a trade-off. More money up front, a little bit cheaper rate over the 30-year time frame. And in this industry where we're talking about, I like the concept of a Smith Island cake, right? There's 7 layers of, at least 7 layers of financing. You got some philanthropic money in there. You got some county money in there. You got some state. You got some federal. You got some private capital. You got a bank. And in truth, these days, it's like stacking 2 Smith Island cakes on top. 14 layers to a traditional financing structure on a project, particularly affordable housing these days, is not uncommon. It's probably closer to the norm. So a double bite of Smith Island cake is where we're at already. And as the world gets more complex, we're adding more layers because I won't call this buying down the rate, but you're buying down overall the cost of the project to get it to the point where the amount of debt you're borrowing better matches the amount of debt service you can pay per year.
So I think that's really interesting when you say that, we have our double Smith Island cake in 14 layers. Are you saying there's like 14 different entities and organizations providing some piece of financing? So you might have some grant money, you might have some private actors, you might have, multiple governments involved. Is that what you mean by like 14 different layers there?
That's exactly what I mean. Yeah, every one of these layers in many cases is a different, unique partner that's involved in the capitalization of your project. And that's exactly right. It's this grant source, this other grant source you just heard about. HUD opens up a new round. The county, Terry and Milana, have been real creative in thinking about how do we create other sources by being good fiduciaries of something like real estate taxes. And is there a way to give a little bit on real estate tax to create another layer in a cake in order to make something better balanced? And so that's exactly right. Every one of these is a partner or a strategy or a tool, and they keep stacking up until you get to a balanced budget.
That sounds just incredibly complex. We can go down a rabbit hole there because I have more questions. But one more thing on interest rates, and then I know we got to switch topics. Can you talk about inflation and kind of how does inflation fit into the interest rate picture and kind of very broadly? Because, we listen to the news, we hear inflation is tied to interest rates, but can you just put a little bit more meat on the bone there and how that connects to housing finance?
Well, the easiest way we talk about it at the Fed and in other ways is what were the cost of eggs? What was the cost of your milk? What did you pay for gas? That's where many people see inflation. And it's just, is it more today than it was yesterday? In the housing landscape, we see it primarily in the inputs to construction. How much is loose lumber? What are we paying these days for TP, roofing product that goes on the roof of it? What's drywall? And we have seen incredible inflation in the inputs that go into housing. Much of this got kicked in during the supply chain disruptions that were going on during COVID, and they've never really gone down. And so you saw the excuse being, oh my gosh, we can't get drywall in shipping containers over to the US. It's going up. We can't get you a switchgear. It'll take a year to get an electrical box that allows your whole building to kind of work. And so because it takes so long to get there, it's going to cost more because everybody wants to spend more to get it. So we've just seen this increasing crazy world of everything going up that goes into a home, and it's never come down. It's never really come down. And then we saw it as well in the labor market. People, rightly so, asked for more money to pay for these rising costs. And we did a great job during COVID of paying attention to really the essential worker, which in many cases are those that we're talking about that live in affordable housing and that help build affordable housing. But as those wages went up, the labor inputs went up. And that was another part of what it cost to build a home. And so we've been in a rising inflationary environment for almost anything that has to do with a home, and that's not helped this story at all on capitalization.
I think, Brian, we're going down this path that continues to reinforce how these things are getting more difficult, not better and not easier for something that's already complicated. And I think I speak for a lot of folks doing this work out there that said, I thought getting zoning and land use changes made at the county or state level, or I thought working with communities to rethink how we're going to get these projects done and get everybody on board, and then we're going to move forward. And then wham, you hit this wall of financial impediments that, I'm going to stay optimistic, Dom, and say, I think we can collectively work to do something about those. But while we're talking about the Smith Island cake, and I was at a conference that I saw it referred to as a slab of pancakes. So I think I like Smith Island cake better, and give the comptroller some credit for that one and pushing that metaphor. But let's pile on that cake, Brian, and let's talk about something that we've been talking a lot for years about: insurance costs and the impact on deals. But I think it's finally starting to hit the broader conversation along with interest rates, inflation, and others. So you always build insurance rates into a deal, but lately you could argue it's having a really oversized impact. And I know in some places we've heard horror stories about California, Florida, Louisiana, where rising insurance rates are killing deals. So we think it's a problem across the country. But talk a little bit about the role of insurance in these complex housing deals. And has it increased even more volatility into something that's already kind of a mess?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these real crises we're at. I think, Terry, and you pick up on it. The truth is, insurers are in the business of staying profitable, and it's amazing that they can look at a market and say, "Boy, last year, because of the hurricane season or the flood season or whatever the case, we had to pay out way more than we took in. We will now choose not to insure in that market." And it's a crazy concept that you could have a home today that you were able to get insurance when you moved in, and now there's not an insurer that will serve you. And so we've seen more just deliberate decisions by insurance companies that are based in actuarial tables and other algorithms to say, I don't want to be in this market, and so I'm leaving it. And the result is there's fewer insurers that will serve certain sectors and markets, and normal supply demand, fewer people offering the product, more and more people need it, price goes up. So 30% increases year over year is not uncommon in affordable housing. The reality of not having insurance has been almost an existential threat to survival for some owners of housing units where they just can't get anyone to insure, and they've asked state commissions to step in. This is a real problem. I'm glad you're putting a spotlight on it. But for the everyday project, I don't think there's a single project in our region, in our state, that hasn't had double-digit growth in the insurance premium cost, over the last, say, 3 years, 4 years. And in some cases, that double-digit starts with a 2 or a 3 or higher. And it's just I won't spend the time trying to unpack it, but it's just what it means is you budgeted that your insurance premium would cost you $300,000 in a year, and all of a sudden it's going to cost you $380,000. And just like I was saying in the beginning, that loss of $70,000 or $80,000 less in bottom line money. Well, that's what's happening. So now the project has less money left over. It's worth less money. The operators have less money for a rainy day fund, and it starts another vicious cycle.
So, Brian, can you talk for a little bit? So I was in a meeting yesterday with Legit, the local government insurance trust, and they're an organization that Mako and MML works with. And one of the things that was stark in that meeting was, even though we're Maryland and we have the situation on the ground in Maryland, what happens in other states impacts us still and impacts our insurance rates. And so we're not California, Florida, and Louisiana. We have a lot of coastline, but thankfully so far, sea level rise is not the worst case scenario like it is in Florida, where in a few decades, whole communities are going to be off the map. Same thing for North Carolina. That being said, that will still have an impact because we're part of this broader national insurance market. That will still have an impact on rates in Maryland. And you talked about that, double-digit insurance rates. Can you kind of talk about, though, a little bit more about that interconnected ecosystem where just because you're looking on the West Coast and, you're not on the West Coast, that will still have an impact here. Can you just kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. I think the easiest way to understand that is a great point. It's a subtle point that some people don't immediately see, but it's this concept that if, one part of the country sneezes, does the rest of the country get a cold? And sadly, in the insurance industry, because these tend to be national insurers, it's true. The full body of the insurance company feels every pain anywhere it happens in the country. And if it stubs its toe, it's going to feel that pain and it's going to want to do something about it. And it tends to spread that answer across the entire country. So you're right. Increased and unprecedented losses due to a fire or a storm or a flood over on one of the coastal communities does get in part made up for by everybody's premiums. And I think I can't say that's every insurer. Not all of them are national, but they're all looking at the same, if you're a big company, your bottom line's your bottom line. You can't make one community pay for all of its true cost. It would sink that community. So you try to figure out how to be a smart business guy and spread it around. I think that's a pretty accurate reflection of the model for a number of insurers.
So, Brian, I'm going to jump back in and let's pull this up into a more macro conversation. All right, let's have some fun, talk about the markets. So, a word that's probably overused, right? We hear a lot about the housing market, but where the rubber really meets the road, a lot of that's really hyper local. And one thing that I see discussed a lot is the general market volatility. Like, is this really a good time to be doing this, and what are the costs? But the need for units is immediate and now, and even if you're looking ahead, it's getting shovels in the ground now to have units in a few years. So the math also changes from place to place and gets really confusing, and you talk regionalism, but yet each county could be in its own place. But the state continues, rightfully so, to talk about statewide needs. So could you just sort of take a step back and talk a little bit about what your view of the housing market in this area, what those impacts are, and sort of general thoughts you have on the subject?
Yeah, it's a really important question, Terry, because in some ways, we leave the housing market to the private players and say, those guys are smart. They're going to build what makes sense to them. And it's quite honestly the way everything works. Like what toys are we going to see at Christmas this year? There's no government that's dictating we've got to bring the Cabbage Patch Kid back. There's just that's not there. It's the private market acting privately. And I think sadly the problem in housing is that's how we allow this industry to work. The private market will seek out what land it wants to buy and what land it wants to develop, and it'll work within codes and planning rules, but it'll build what it thinks is best. The truth is, when you scale that down to its core ugly truth, building affordable housing is usually not the best model for a private player. You just don't make much money. I mean, the idea of saying, okay, I could take the same land and build 80 units on it and only charge at most $900 a month and basically use the same materials. Or I can build it and charge $1,800 a month. Well, I'd rather charge $1,800 a month because I have a better chance of recouping my investment and getting more investment in the future because I made these investors money and it gives me the chance to go do another project now. So left to its own devices, there's very few opportunities in the housing industry to just start out with the idea of let me build something for the average worker in America, or let me build something that is affordable to teachers, our government employees, or anyone who's not in this now upper 20, 30% of our income strata. And for the sad truth is we've used more and more of our declining land and resources to build more and more product for the upper income components of our national society. And so we have this dramatic and almost permanent now mismatch between demanders who are looking for the basic average earner rent or price for a house and the suppliers who are building something that's usually twice that, both in size and in finishes and everything other imaginable way. So we've got a problem. The bells have been ringing. It started out as a cold. It's now metastasized. We have a true nearly kind of mortality challenging issue in front of us, and how long we've allowed this system to play out left to its own devices.
So I think is it fair to say the private markets, and I think I'm just restating something you said, but is it fair to say the private markets don't always respond well to human services emergencies at the local level? And if they do respond well, it's generally in favor of the market side, right? So by not doing things when the problem began, or at least not getting motivated enough to do things when the problem began to be apparent, and waiting for it to build to what we now, I think, openly call a housing crisis, it makes it even more difficult to interact with the market. And locals are forced to decide, do we interfere with the market through subsidy or regulation? And then we run the risk of creating bigger problems. I mean, is that an accurate depiction of the mess? And you have any high-level thoughts if you're sitting here in a county office building? Like, how do you start to get your head around this?
Well, no, I think I can't improve upon how you just framed it. I think that's exactly it. And I think that, but for folks, like you and other municipal leaders who go, who really see it as part of their goal is to ring that bell, sound the alarm crisis, and not just to get people to turn their head and look, but to say, okay, well, here's how I'm going to fix it. Right, I'm going to bring the financing and other tools. If that's a speedier process for the permits, if that's a little bit of hand holding on how to access funding, whatever the case, and actual funding resources. I mean, the point is you've got to have a group that cares about the other folks and sees it as their charge to advocate on their behalf, to bring the tools necessary to change it and get a different outcome on the street. But I think the problem is you can't do it alone, and the alarm bells still aren't loud enough, and the solution set that's available to fix it is still years behind where it should be. And so every year, the gap of people who need affordable housing versus the supply that's being brought to the market continues to just get bigger.
Brian, your answer here has just I'm trying to articulate my question because I have so many thoughts going off based on the way that you just articulated this, which was beautiful, by the way. Very well said. So I'm really big in the housing space, especially in Annapolis. That's part of my niche at Mako. And there's this debate, it sounds like, basically, if I'm understanding you correctly, naturally occurring affordable housing isn't really a thing. It's not natural. It has to be artificial. And so I have two thoughts going on in my head right now, and I'm curious what your reaction is. It sounds like we either have to, A, realize that affordable housing isn't actually natural and there needs to be some form of government intervention, whether that's subsidy, moving things along faster, something, or you take the other approach and you say, well, everything's always going to be market driven. And so we just need to build, baby, build. And eventually we're going to have oversupply in the market. And that's how you correct this. I mean, that's what's going on in my head right now. Do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, no, you're right. If one thing were to happen more, which is if somehow we had like a secret spray paint that we could, an invisible spray paint, and we could go to all the new stuff that gets built this year, and in the middle of the night spray paint those buildings so that they age 10 years faster every year, because that's the only thing that gets them to be affordable. As they get old and people can't charge the rents they want to. The core owners of those properties would still collect a non-affordable rent if they could. It's naturally occurring affordable because they don't have any other natural solutions to raise the rent. It's an older, obsolete building. It was built as an A, and now it's a B or a B minus or a C plus, and they gotta lower the rents to get people to move in. That's the only thing that's happening. So if we build, baby, build at the current scale and orientation that we're using, which is we build bigger units, nicer units, more expensive units, because it's a smarter way for a private player to stay alive and to stay profitable.
So how is this market today? So what are we recording this on June 10th, 2026? How is this different from like the age of the baby boomers, when you can have a one income household? I'm going to buy the single family house, white picket fence. We're going to have 3 kids and a golden retriever. And now we're talking about, well, actually, naturally according to affordable housing, you got 10 years if you're going to build the units today before they become affordable for the average person. What's the economic difference between where we were at 70 years ago and today?
That's an awesome question, and I'll try to give a half decent answer. And the easiest part of the answer is, well, we just we built smaller homes. We built them to be affordable to the average earner, and the average median earner could earn enough money to buy the newer built home. That's the way the world was. That was the way developers looked at land, and that's the way consumers looked at the opportunity. And it was just kind of like a more peaceful, simple time in our country, where you go to work as at one point a single parent led household of income, and you could buy a house. You fast forward now, and the truth is, we know all too well that the number of folks who want to buy a nice home is way bigger than the number of homes available.
I know. I need this podcast to do well. I want to be one of those people.
Exactly. But that's not how the world was. We didn't build it for the top 10% of folks in society. We built because the average demander wanted a home. It was actually part of national public housing. And public housing didn't start out as the way we think of it now, but it was understood at the government level we need better housing. We need more housing. Now, again, we didn't let everybody into that housing. Certain groups couldn't move into it, and that's a whole other chapter and a whole other conversation. And we still live with the lagged results of why folks who couldn't leave the urban areas were left in and left with little supports, and we allowed our urban centers to decay. But that's a whole nother topic. The way I would say it today is this. If you could buy NVIDIA stock or Apple stock today at the price it was, go back a decade, would you? Well, of course you would, because you know how profitable it's going to be. And that's what's happened to housing. We realized over time how profitable housing could be, how much money could be made at it, how successful you could be being a developer. And so people started building something that allowed them to really lean in on this industry. So this industry became not a government or a societal good. It was at one point it was just a good. We needed good picket fence housing in the suburbs to support the growing population. It became a commodity that you could profiteer in quickly if you were smart. And that's I would say that's what's taken over now. And so no one's going to offer an NVIDIA stock today at prices 10 years ago, because why would you if you can sell it at today's value? And so everyone's looking at today's values and building things for today's values and today's demanders, because there's someone who will buy an NVIDIA today. Yes, if you offer an NVIDIA at 10 year ago prices, a lot more people would buy it. But why? Why would you want to do that? Just sell it at what it's worth today. And that's just the way capitalism works in housing. it's a commodity industry now.
Terry, do you want one more bite at this apple before we go to federal policy? Because this has just been a really great conversation.
Let's let it sit for a minute. I think you got to sort of digest that, but I think it's a good transition to get to where you want to steer the conversation, because on one side, we do have the markets. On the other hand, we've got the local impact on policy and the political will and the strategy and the urgency to get something done now. But there's a whole other third hand lurking out there, which is the federal government. So take it away.
That's a great transition. The federal government really, I mean, it has its tentacles in everything when it comes to housing policy. I mean, you have immigration policy, which has to do with the workforce. We have tariffs, which have to do with materials. We had all that Canadian lumber coming in. The Federal Reserve, which you are connected to, has interest rate policy. We have subsidies and different on the social side of stuff with HUD and other agencies within the federal government. So very big question, and I know we're asking you a very big question, but from a high level and specifically related to the financing side, where does the federal government fit in? And again, I realize that's a very big thing I'm asking you to break down.
Well, if we start with an assumption that the federal government is here to serve the best interest, the best national interest of our country, then I think the answer is simple. They certainly have a huge role to play in this conversation, because it is now, I remember years ago, there was a huge push to try to get on a presidential debate stage the term housing crisis said out loud. We couldn't get it. There were advocates working on it. Terry named it and nailed it earlier. Now everyone's talking about it. Now we just need more people doing something about it. And the federal government has a huge role. They've always had a huge role to play in this, both from a policy in terms of how the money gets out, who it benefits, and then also in the budget process, how much money gets out and how much impact does it make. And then at the end of the day, housing is local. You need smart folks on the ground in the counties, in the cities, and the municipalities who can drive the right outcome and drive the right policy. But it's often and will always be the case that the way we talk about one of the most important, I think, needs in our society, which is good shelter, right? A good attainable place that you can go to at night that gives you not just something that fits your budget, but something that fits your values and your future and your hopes and dreams. The more we deliver on that as a country, the better we are as a country. The more, to me, there's nothing that impacts a human's well-being more than their home and their community. And if we want to talk about all the cascading issues of health and overall satisfaction and consumer sentiment, it all starts, in my mind, at the home and community level. And so I think the federal government has to be a smart champion and a bigger leader in this space.
Brian, this is really an opinion question for you, because it's so complex right now. But the feeling I get that's shared by a number of folks in this space is that Congress and to some degree the executive branch, HUD, are finally getting around to what we hoped we would see, which is a push towards loosening, relaxing, modernizing, or rationalizing the regulatory environment, right? What can the federal government do to start to remove some of the unnecessary impediments? All the way back to the beginning of this podcast about time and certainty in the rules. Are you feeling hopeful that these congressional and discussions at the federal level are going to trickle down and make these deals even a little bit easier to get done?
I don't feel hopeful, Terry. I want to feel hopeful.
I was teeing you up. That was the big elevated.
Oh, I know.
But I will say this is an audio medium, so people are going to see the video. Terry and I busted out laughing when you just.
Man, yeah, maybe in the editing booth you can add a talk over to my answer and make it sound more upbeat. I've been a downer for too long, and I'm working on finding my happy pill in this space. I think the good news, Terry, is it's not a local or political or a party issue. It's a national issue, to your point. And so if we can just have smart people get in a room and take all the other noise out and just say, well, what is in the best interest of our country, and try to use the lessons of the past. We have a lot of learnings in the housing industry. a lot of mistakes in policy and a lot of wins. I think we can emerge with some real solutions.
That works. And Dom, I now realize that you tee Brian up for big aspirational final comments at your own peril, right? Like you're gonna get the real answer no matter what. And I think, I'm gonna build towards this final one. We're gonna give you one more shot at this, Brian, because I feel, Dom, like there's some policy grad students out there that are gonna hear this podcast and go, oh yeah, that housing job I was going to take, maybe I'm going to go into IT or something different. So we got to turn this around a little bit. I think what Brian just said is absolutely spot on. I think there's widespread universal understanding that it's a problem that's not going to get better if you let it go and don't do anything, right? And it isn't just a housing issue. We used to say that in a cute way. It's not just housing, but it's really going to start to have all of these other economic impacts, and it's going to hurt growth and get us in this cycle. So, Brian, we know it's a problem. We know we've got to deal with it. We know as locals, we are probably in the foxholes around this. What would be your advice for the folks that are listening? We don't want to leave them hopeless. What should we be doing, real action oriented, to start to at least move in the right direction?
Look, I appreciate the second attempt to tee this up for me to move this.
We believe in you, Brian. You can do it.
I can do it. Look, I'll be honest. I think this is awesome. Just having honest conversations with the next generation of leaders in this field, so they really understand how it used to be, what it can be, and don't accept just how it is as the default. I think that you're right. It's hard to believe I'm now the old guy in the room. I mean, I literally talk about projects I did in the 90s, and I've got folks next to me who just did their degree 5 years earlier. And so I think we're in this unique world where we are getting leaders of multiple generations in the housing industry together. And I think the passing along the torch and the knowledge is what we've got to do, because we can imagine and we can vision a better, more inclusive, more healthy, less politicized solution and system. And I do think that bringing people who actually have that as a motivation into this industry is critical. And I think that happens by having honest conversations like this about the truth, about being, kind of reasonably self-critical of ourselves and of what we've accomplished or not, and being reasonably proactive and thoughtful about what could be. And I'll just add, Terry, that I think that it's misplaced to think it starts at the top. I mean, I want to really iterate housing is local. Local leaders, local mayors, local planning folks, local housing folks can make such a huge difference. This is one of those industries where even now when I drive back to York, Pennsylvania, more than almost 30 years later, I see buildings I built. I mean, it's such a wonderful, it's a small town of 40,000 people, but that building there and that house there, I remember negotiating the purchase so I could put 3 houses together to build a affordable housing project on that one block, and then the 8 on that block. And so I do want to tell people that, this is that industry where your legacy lives in a positive way, and it starts local, and you gotta learn it, you gotta talk about it, and you gotta convene around it, and you gotta advocate for it.
Well, you've inspired now, and so before we let you go, do you really think that local government officials should start to chase and sell their counties to private investors to try to pull in more of this private market that we've been talking about for the past half an hour?
Yeah, I don't think that's an inherently evil thing. I think that you need private players who are willing to take the risk and put together the years of work needed, all those layers, right? I think what's important is to have the proper set of government folks putting the boundaries and the rules around that project in place, and then enforcing it and ensuring that the outcome is exactly what they intended, that this is to be built for a different target demand group than what they would have done on their own devices.
I feel like this is a great place to leave this episode. Brian, thank you for the very intriguing high-level conversation. You certainly met our mark. Terry, do you have any closing thoughts before we hop off?
Couldn't do better than what Brian just said. Great place to end it. I hope we've created some thought and also some, maybe next steps for folks that are listening.
All right, let me read us out. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. The Briefing Room will be out on Tuesdays with our regular show on Fridays. Register now for the annual Mako Summer Conference, August 12th through 15th in Ocean City, Maryland. And thank you to everyone for listening to The Briefing Room here on the Conduit Street Podcast.
Thank you.